I felt the city turn brittle the week before Christmas, like sugar pulled too thin. Frost webbed the panes in neat geometry, and the streets moved as if they worried any sudden kindness might crack the air. Every December has a lesson it means to teach. That year's lesson arrived in the shape of a man who wanted a bargain no winter should grant. He worked alone in a house that remembered better company. Bottles waited in ranks like soldiers afraid of being dismissed. Flame lived under glass and called itself science. He kept to precise hours and untidy thoughts. He was a scholar of compounds and a collector of hurts. People in the neighborhood knew him as the chemist with the extinguished look, the one whose lamp burned late, while families folded their evenings around supper and songs. He had lost more than one person and allowed the losses to define him the way iron defines a prison. He thought of himself as haunted by others. He did not notice he had begun to haunt himself. On the longest evenings, I hear wishes with more clarity than bells. Children ask for dolls that do not break and skates that will outlast the thaw. Grown men ask for work that fix their hands. Women ask for an hour that will not be claimed by anyone else's need. The chemist asked for oblivion, not sleep, erasure. He wanted memory to release him from its grip and to stop collecting debts in the currency of sorrow. He considered the past a wound that could be cauterized if only he found the correct flame. It is not my custom to appear in rooms where men are bargaining with their own reflections. I'm an assistant to mornings, not a broker of midnights. Still, I paused on his sill when the lamp flared and the glass caught the shape he had been trying not to see. It was himself, thinned of mercy and thickened with scorn, made of all the cold conclusions pain is pleased to sell. The figure promised a gift he should not have wanted, the power to forget grief, and because such gifts are greedy, to make anyone he touched forget tenderness too. The city held its breath as he accepted. Agreements made in proud loneliness ripple farther than their authors imagine. He believed he was asking for relief. He was asking to be emptied. He tested his bargain the way a man tests a door after the lock has changed. He touched the bruised places of his heart and felt nothing. The names that had once made the air meaningful passed through him like wind through wire. Relief arrived like ice water. His face relaxed into an expression that would never again frighten him by breaking. He mistook numbness for peace. Then he went out. A corner shop kept by a printer and his wife sat 2 streets from the chemist's rooms. I admire that pair. They were small-shouldered and large-hearted, a family assembled out of late hours and honest bread. Packages balanced on the counter beside a little tower of newspapers that tried to make sense of the world and mostly advertised its noise. Children came and went like small comets, reporting rumors, inventing chores, finding joy where it had not been left. This household made the city more itself every day by refusing to let harshness set the menu. The chemist carried his new emptiness into their warmth. He had done them a kindness long ago without calling it charity, and they kept a place on their mantle for gratitude. Now gratitude met vacancy. He set his hand on the shoulder of one of the children as you might casually steady an eager colt, and I felt it at once, the bargain doing its work. The boy's bright affection dimmed. A small quarrel, which would have been soothed by a laugh, sharpened into meanness. A little pride that should have grown into responsibility shriveled into sulking. Laughter retreated to the edge of the room and counted the exits. He moved on. In a narrow court lived an older man with a quick tongue and a tender wife who made a science of tea. They had watched over the chemist as younger people once watched over them. He touched the husband's hand in a moment that asked for nothing more than patience. Patience left. The quick tongue grew barbs. The tender wife received them and sat very straight to keep from breaking in polite company. I have seen storms arrive noisily and pass quickly. I have seen colder weather, the long season when a face forgets it can soften. That weather had begun to spread. It is a proud kind of misery that asks to be universal. The phantom understood this perfectly. It wore his features and his logic. Everywhere the chemist went, numbness propagated as neatly as frost on glass. The poor grew harsher with one another, because harshness is cheap to acquire and expensive to cure. The comfortable grew comfortable with contempt, because contempt is easier to carry than compassion when hands are cold. Children learned the language of getting instead of the grammar of giving. Adults rehearsed injuries as if they were proofs. The city became a mirror in which the chemist's error congratulated itself. There was one house where his bargain refused to behave. On the edge of that same court lived a woman who practiced kindness with the discipline some men give to trades. She did not mistake softness for strength. She used gentleness like a tool. Her door swung on hinges that had been oiled by habit. She made soup that repaired people. She steadied those who hurried and quieted those who had not been invited to any list. She had known sorrow, as anyone worth listening to has, yet refused to let sorrow reduce her to summary judgments. I am partial to such women. They do my work from kitchens I will never enter and make the morning possible long before I arrive. The chemist's shadow crossed her floor, and the bargain tried to take hold. He touched another visitor, a young girl with eyes full of weather, and the air shivered with the intention to erase. The woman of the house stepped between them in the casual way you place yourself between a child and a cart, and said something so ordinary it filled the room like light. "Sit down, eat, tell me what is needed." The phantom's logic met a thing it had not planned for. Present tense care. Erasure paused. I adjusted the draft in her chimney so the flame would keep to its work without showing off. I do very little in such rooms. They are already well run. I get enough to help warmth declare itself in the corners where suspicion likes to wait. The young girl's story found sentences instead of stony silence. The chemist watched a transaction he had forgotten how to make, the exchange of attention for trust, of time for truth. He remembered nothing of his own griefs. He felt everything of theirs, briefly, like a man warming his hands and being startled to discover he still has hands. The phantom did not leave. It never leaves at first. It simply moved the argument to different defendants. If compassion would not be erased in that house, it would be exhausted. It would make need arrive faster than any pot can boil. It would multiply irritations and break small things that take too long to repair. It would make the doorbell ring at the worst possible moment. It would hint that the mountain of sorrow cannot be climbed with a spoon. Meanwhile, the city continued its experiment with forgetting. Rampant cheerfulness is not my business. Responsible joy is. I saw little of either. People went about their errands efficiently and without much reason to think well of themselves later. A carter went past a man who had fallen because falling had ceased to be a claim on anyone's afternoon. Two neighbors who could have traded favors for the price of 10 good words chose to pay cash for worse results because trust had been erased from their vocabulary. A child offered a seat to a stranger out of instinct and then, in confusion, took it back as if ashamed to be caught caring. The phantom's math is tidy and ruinous. Subtract pain, subtract mercy, subtract memory, subtract meaning. I say again what I am for. Mornings. Mornings depend on memory. You cannot put the right item by the door for the next day's work if you will not admit what the last day asked of you. You cannot shape a generous habit if you refuse to recall the moment you were saved by someone else's. You cannot celebrate truly if you will not confess fully. The chemist's bargain had set a match to everything that makes beginnings braver than endings. So I cheated. I do not cheat often. It is not elegant. It can feel like insult to courage properly earned. But the year was turning, and my list contained too many names who would not receive what they needed if the city continued to behave as if nobody had ever been hurt and nobody had ever healed. I did not change anyone's heart. That is not my craft. I changed the weather inside one room. The woman of kindness lit an extra lamp without remarking on the cost. I made the flame stand taller than its wick deserved. The soup stretched farther than arithmetic approved. Strangers arrived precisely when another chair had been pulled to the table. The faint perfume of oranges, one small gift from a cousin who could not afford to be generous and was generous anyway, lingered long enough to make hope smell plausible. The young girl, whose story had been treated roughly by the streets, fell asleep with her cheek on her sleeve for the first time in months and did not wake to apologize. The chemist stood apart, neither included nor excluded, and felt the ache numbness cannot cure, longing. I brought him a memory, not of his particular sorrow, that would be a cruelty the ghost could use as evidence, but of an old morning when he had given a better part of himself without being asked. He had carried a feverish boy across a square, arguing with the apothecary until the man was bullied into being helpful, paying from his own pocket while pretending not to. On that day, he had not asked whether kindness worked mathematically. He had not composed philosophy to justify attention. He had acted. His body remembered what his arrangement with the phantom had suppressed. His hands asked for work. He reached to adjust the blanket on the sleeping girl's shoulders. The bargain resisted. Numbness pushed back. The phantom leaned, and glass on the mantel shivered with it. He did not withdraw. He set the blanket right. The child breathed the deep breath safe rooms teach. A note of the city's music returned. There is often an emblem at the hinge of these stories. Sometimes it's a bell, sometimes a candle, sometimes a toy someone refuses to hoard. In this house, it was a small loaf. It had been saved for a feast at week's end. The woman cut it now, because tomorrow's celebration is only tomorrow's if someone's hunger can be addressed today. She gave the first slice to the visitor who had not earned it. She gave the next to the chemist without ceremony, which is the highest ceremony. He ate. The bread tasted like the past, insisting on the right to instruct. He went back to his rooms that night and argued with the figure in the glass. The phantom offered proofs. Memory is pain. Therefore, remove memory and remove pain. The city is cruel. Therefore, remove feeling and remove harm. People are ungrateful. Therefore, remove gift and remove disappointment. The case sounded convincing if you refused to interview any witnesses. He thought of the boy on the square, of the girl at the table, of the Prinfers family drifting toward a meanness none of them had wanted. He thought of the old couple whose marriage had become a contest of who could be less forgiving. He thought of the woman who made soup like a sacrament, and bread like a plan, and light like a vote. He said no. He said it softly, because that is how most conversion begins. He said no again louder, because practice makes strength. He asked for his grief back. The phantom does not surrender easily. It reminded him of graves and failures, of letters that arrived too late, and words that should not have been said, of a friend who had not been rescued, and a love that had been lost, and the sick rightness of anger when it first arrives, and the poisonous prestige of carrying that anger like a banner. He asked again, not for punishment, for membership in the human race. You cannot belong to a people if we refuse to share their aches. The glass clouded, the flame lowered, the figure thinned. When bargains break, they crack like ice underfoot. Alarm, then a rush of relief. He fell into his chair and wept, which healed nothing and began everything. The city changed slowly, as cities do. The printer's house rediscovered its own laughter, which had been hiding behind fatigue. The old husband found his wife's hand in the dark and apologized in a sentence that sounded like it had been translated from a language he had forgotten he spoke. The child who had snatched back his seat offered it again the next day on purpose and felt, to his amazement, taller. The woman of kindness carried on carrying on. There are no medals for that work, but I keep a ledger, and allowed herself, later, the luxury of being tired. As for the chemist, he made no speeches. He apologized in the currency of provisions and presents. He visited the poor as he had promised himself to do long ago, and had failed to do because failure is a shadow that grows, if not contradicted by fresh acts. He stood by the bedsides where sorrow had been disinfected away, and let sorrow return long enough to become love again. He sent for the old couple and gave them the room that would hold them both without scraping pride raw. He brought back to the printer's door a parcel wrapped badly because practice in generosity takes time to improve. He returned to the woman's kitchen with nothing clever to say and everything necessary to learn. He kept his grief. He kept his membership card. The phantom? It did not die. You cannot kill a version of yourself by winning an argument one time. But it lost its leverage. It became only a reflection, useful as a warning, comical when it tried to be grand. When it raised its chin inside the glass, he nodded to it like a man nods to a neighbor he has decided to ignore for both their peace, and went about the business of remembering. I left him with a small gift on the table by the window, a vial without a label, not a potion, a reminder. Inside was nothing but clear water and a folded scrap that said, "For dissolving pride, not recommended with tea." He smiled when he found it without being able to explain why, which is one of my favorite outcomes. He set it beside the lamp and kept it there. And on nights when the city suggested that kindness is inefficient and memory is a trap and sorrow is an error, he would turn the little glass so it caught the light and behaved like a bell in a house that had not been built with one. If your December brings you a ghost that calls itself relief and asks you to pay with the part of you that knows how to ache for others, barter no farther. Keep your ledger of losses, not to worship it, to learn from it. Keep the faces that hurt you near, not to be hurt again, but to make your hand swifter toward the next face. Keep the failures, not to be punished twice, but to practice the opposite. Keep the griefs, because they season the bread you will feed to someone who comes to your door with a story still tangled in their throat. Memory is not a weight you must drag through snow. It is the map that keeps you from walking in circles when the world goes white. If you are offered the chance to erase it, understand that the price is not only your pain. The price will be your capacity. Decline with thanks. Open your door. Put on another pot. Let the morning be instructed by the night, and let the night be forgiven by the morning. Merry Christmas! May your ghosts keep only the appointments that strengthen you. May your bargains be few and honest. May your griefs educate your hands without embittering your mouth. And may your house learn, as that humble kitchen learned, how to make light an act of memory and bread a language everyone can understand.